The Operator Log, Episode 16, How We Think, the argument we've been making, 15 operational memos, one vision for the next decade, the story so far before the next chapter begins. Last week, we closed the architectural argument with auditable autonomy, the governance layer that makes every prior element of the ARCO model transferable to an acquirer. The preview at the end of that episode said, the arc closes. This is episode 16. The pillar shifts back to how we think, the pillar this podcast started in 16 episodes ago. The arc bookends itself. This episode serves two purposes simultaneously. For the listener who has followed all 16 episodes, it is the full argument stated in its most complete form. The 15 preceding episodes built the argument piece by piece. This episode names what they built toward, not as a recap, but as a closing statement. For the listener arriving for the first time, it is the entry point the memo for this week was written to be. A map of the argument before you begin it, and a guide to where to start. 15 episodes were published since this show began. They were not planned as a sequence, but they form one, and before what comes next, a body of work that extends and builds on everything published so far, it is worth naming what these 15 episodes were building toward and how to read them if you are arriving for the first time. This is the operator log. 4 of the 16 episodes exist to define the terms. If that sounds like a preliminary reading, it is not. Every episode published after them draws on the precision they establish. The terms they define are the shared vocabulary without which everything that follows becomes imprecise. And imprecision in the argument ARCO is making is a structural failure. A loosely defined claim about automation is not a claim about anything. A precisely defined claim about the architectural difference between an automated business and an autonomous one is a claim that can be verified, measured, and built from. Episode 1 draws the single most load-bearing distinction in the arc, the difference between an automated business and an autonomous one. An automated business uses technology to make existing human workflows faster. An autonomous business is engineered from the ground up so that its core operations run without human intervention. The difference is not technological, it is architectural. Everything that follows in the arc depends on that distinction being precise. If episode 1's argument is understood, every subsequent episode makes sense structurally. If it is not, the later episode describe features of a system the listener has not yet conceptually built. Episode 2 establishes what agentic means at the operational level, not as a property of software, but as a condition of a business. A business is agentic when more than 80% of cross-departmental handoffs execute without human intervention. Below that threshold, you have an assisted operation. Above it, the economics change. The coordination tax stops scaling with volume. Headcount stops being a function of output, and the structural advantage of the architecture becomes measurable. The 80% threshold is the line. Every subsequent argument about why autonomous businesses outperform incumbents rests on what happens structurally when that line is crossed. Episode 3 names the cost that the 80% threshold eliminates, the coordination tax, the overhead generated by human-to-human alignment, the meetings, approvals, status updates, and the end-of emails required to move work from one human to the next, consumes between 20 and 30% of operating budgets in a traditionally structured business. It does not decline when AI tools are added. It declines when the human-in-the-loop dependencies that generate it are removed. Episode 3 also introduces operational drag, the ratio of non-revenue-generating work to total operational capacity. Operational drag is the metric that replaces productivity in an autonomous business, because the question is not how productive the humans are. It is how little of the system's capacity is consumed by work that is not the business. Episode 10 defines the human role that remains when these terms have been implemented correctly, the stewardship model. One competent operator overseeing an agentic stack, governing the architecture, resolving the exceptions it surfaces, improving the logic with every intervention. Not performing tasks, not managing workers, governing a system. The performance metric is MTTI, mean time to intervention. Greater than 72 hours, the architecture is holding. Declining, something is degrading. MTTI is the operational pulse of an autonomous business, and it measures the one thing that matters in this model: how independently the system does its work. These four are the load-bearing walls. Remove any one of them, and the argument above it loses its structural support. They are not introductory reading. They are the foundation on which the market thesis and the operating proof are built. Once the lexicon is in place, 4 episodes make the market case. Together, they answer a single question that every operator and investor will ask first. Given this architectural model, where do you build, and why does this approach beat the alternatives? Episode 5 answers where. The market selection framework rests on a primary filter, the human-to-logic ratio. If human labor accounts for more than 60% of gross margin in a market, the incumbent is selling coordination, not a product or a system. That market is structurally reconstructible by an autonomous competitor. 4 secondary signals confirm the target: a decade-long track record of stable demand, high fragmentation among incumbents, low technological adoption among market leaders, and the absence of regulatory barriers at the Tier 1 task level. Markets that pass all 5 criteria are not speculative opportunities. They are structural facts: proven demand, proven willingness to pay, proven incumbent inefficiency. The experiment is not the build. The experiment is the research that precedes it. Episode 4 answers why iteration is not the right tool for this category of build. The MVP model was designed for markets where demand is uncertain, where the founder needs to discover whether anyone will pay before committing to an architecture. Arco does not enter markets where demand is uncertain. It enters markets where demand has been documented for a decade. In that context, the MVP is the wrong instrument for the wrong problem. It imports a speculative risk management framework into a situation that is not speculative. The rebuild tax, the engineering cost of reconstructing a system built under MVP conditions at the moment growth requires it, is the price of that miscalibration. Arco pays the architectural cost upfront. It does not pay the rebuild tax. Episode 6 answers why the incumbent cannot respond even when it sees the reconstruction coming. Legacy liability is the structural condition of a business too dependent on human-centric coordination to rebuild itself from within. The coordination tax that makes the incumbent slow and expensive to operate also prevents it from eliminating the coordination overhead, because the elimination requires dismantling the organization built around it, and no board votes for that. The same scale that made the incumbent dominant makes it structurally resistant to the architectural change that would allow it to compete. Legacy liability is not a technology gap. It is an organizational commitment that cannot be reversed. Episode 7 answers why the venture studio is the right vehicle for this approach rather than the standalone founder. Infrastructure drag. The 12 to 18 months of foundational engineering every autonomous build must absorb before the core revenue loop can run is paid once in the studio model and inherited by every subsequent build. The agentic core compounds through the flywheel. A founder building alone pays infrastructure drag fresh every time. The studio pays it once and earns compounding returns on that investment across every deployment that follows. The studio model is not a service layer. It is the mechanism by which the marginal cost of building the next autonomous company declines with every build that precedes it. 4 structural observations. 4 reasons the same argument leads to the same place every time it is made precisely. Enter proven markets, build without iteration, enter before the incumbent can respond, and build inside a structure that compounds the operational intelligence each deployment produces. The third layer is the one that separates a framework from a record of actual work. 8 episodes document what happens when the system runs, what breaks, how failure is handled, how the business is governed, how the cost structure changes, how the business communicates with other machines, how its decisions are audited, and why each decision made during the build determines what the company is worth at exit. These episodes are only possible because the building is already happening. They are not theory about what autonomous businesses could do. They are documentation of what ARCOs do. Episode 8 establishes why the log itself exists, who the 3 audiences are, and what each one requires. Operators need a reference architecture grounded in operational practice rather than theory. Institutional investors need evidence of structural integrity, not growth projections, but proof that the architecture produces predictable and measurable operational behavior. Acquirers need pre-acquisition documentation, the public record that reduces informational asymmetry before due diligence begins. The log serves all 3, but the weight of each episode falls differently depending on the audience. The lexicon episodes are most important for operators. The market thesis episodes are most important for institutional investors. The operating proof episodes are most important for acquirers because the proof layer is where every claim made in the first 2 layers is tested against operational reality. Episode 9 is the most operationally specific piece in the arc, and by that measure, the most important. It names 3 failure modes that every autonomous system will encounter: context leakage, an agent losing task intent across a long multi-step workflow; handoff friction, a schema mismatch at an integration point causing an agent to hallucinate a fix rather than report the failure; and logic decay, calibrated logic producing incorrect outputs as the data environment shifts. These are not theoretical failure modes. They are documented failure classes with named detection mechanisms and named recovery protocols: the execution divergence threshold, the machine-readable interface, the continuous regression loop, and ghost trials. Episode 9 is the piece that separates those who understand autonomous business design from those who still treat it as a feature of software rather than a property of architecture. Software does not have context leakage. Architectures do. Episodes 11 and 15 are the most important for an acquirer reading the arc. Episode 11 establishes that liquidity is an engineering requirement, that every architectural decision made from the first line of code simultaneously determines the business's operational performance and its exit value. Keyman risk is designed out. The coordination tax does not multiply at acquisition. Post-merger integration is a technical synchronization. These are not exit features added late. They are the consequences of every prior decision made correctly. Episode 15 closes the argument. Auditable autonomy is the governance layer that makes all of it verifiable. An acquirer does not trust the seller's account of how the system has been running. They verify it through the proof of action ledger, through the deterministic logging architecture, through a complete operational record that cannot be altered and that does not depend on the founding team's continued presence to be understood. Episodes 12, 13, and 14 are the infrastructure consequences: how the flywheel compounds operational intelligence across builds, how the business presents itself to agent customers through machine-readable interfaces, and why the desassing discipline produces a cost structure that scales with compute rather than headcount. Each of these is the same architectural principle expressed in a different domain, the same decision to own the logic and rent the compute, the same commitment to API-first interfaces over human-mediated interactions, the same refusal to pay for overhead the architecture has made redundant. Together, the lexicon, the market thesis, and the operating proof, they form a single coherent argument, not a framework that describes what autonomous businesses could be, a record of what they are, how they are built, how they fail safely, how they are governed, and what they are worth when the architecture is complete. What is the argument Arco has been making across its 15 operational memos? Arco's 15 operational memos form a single argument in 3 layers. The lexicon layer. Episodes 1, 2, 3, and 10 defines the foundational terms, the architectural distinction between an automated business and an autonomous one, the 80% threshold that separates an agentic operation from an assisted one, the coordination tax that makes incumbents structurally expensive, and the stewardship model that defines the human role in a business where agents run the revenue loop. The market thesis layer. Episodes 4, 5, 6, and 7 names which markets are structurally reconstructible, why iteration is the wrong tool for proven markets, why incumbents cannot respond to autonomous competitors, and why the studio model compounds the advantage. The operating proof layer. Episodes 8 through 15 documents what actually happens when autonomous systems run, what breaks, how failure is handled, how the cost structure changes, and how every architectural decision made during the build determines the business's exit value. Here is the argument. Most businesses built around AI are optimizing the past. They are taking workflows designed for human execution, adding technology to make those workflows faster, and calling the result transformation. The coordination tax continues to run. The legacy liability continues to accumulate. The cost structure continues to scale with the head count because the architecture was never designed to decouple them. The agents were added. The structure remained. Arco builds differently. We enter proven markets where the demand is documented and the incumbent is structurally expensive. We build from a clean sheet, without iteration, without MVPs, without accumulating the rebuild tax that the retrospective reconstruction requires. We build agentic systems that cross the 80% threshold and hold it, where MTTI exceeds 72 hours and operational drag stays below 5%. We govern those systems through the stewardship model, one operator for each business, managing the architecture rather than the work. We compound the intelligence each build produces through the Arco flywheel, so every deployment inherits the resolved failure patterns of every deployment before it. We build machine-readable interfaces so the business is transactable by agents as well as humans. We eliminate the UI tax through desussing, paying for compute, not for software designed for users the architecture no longer has. And we audit every decision through proof of action, so that what we build can be verified, transferred, and trusted by any institutional partner who requires evidence rather than assurance. That is the full argument. It took 15 episodes to build with the precision it requires. It rests on terminology, on structural observation, and on the operational record of businesses that are already running this way. The full written version of this argument, each of its 15 constituent pieces, is on the blog at arcoventure.studio. The Arco lexicon at arcoventure.studio/lexicon defines every term this podcast has introduced. Memo number 16, the argument we've been making, is the reading guide that maps the sequence if you are arriving for the first time. What comes next is the next chapter, built on everything already published, extended in the directions the first 15 memos made possible. These 15 memos are not context for what comes next. They are the foundation it rests on. This has been episode 16 of the Operator Log.